Thank you, Mr Speaker.
The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Mr. Speaker.
Megan Woods.
Mr Speaker, it is my great pleasure to speak in this third reading of this bill. I think that this bill is an incredibly important and symbolic piece of legislation in terms of the recovery of Christchurch, and part of that recovery needs to be our cultural recovery, Mr Speaker. I too want to pay tribute to the work of a number of people. The member who has just taken her seat, the member for Christchurch Central, the Honourable Nikki Wagner, has worked hard on this bill, and I'd like to commend her on that work. I'd also like to pay tribute to the Chairwoman of the Arts Centre Trust, Jean Crawford, and to the CE, Andre Lovett, who are here for the work that they have put in, and other members of that board that have done it. And also, Mr Speaker, to the fellow members of the Local Government and Environment Select Committee, one of the most productive committees in this Parliament that works very well together to find good solutions. The Minister who has just taken her seat has talked of some of the changes that we were able to achieve at Select Committee, which I think, Mr Speaker, has led to a strengthened piece of legislation that we are now seeing here for its final reading today. I think the final reading, what this bill has done beside modernising the governance arrangements and setting in place the future of our Arts Centre in Christchurch, which is incredibly important, has given many members of this House, also this legislation, the opportunity to reminisce about the site of the Arts Centre through the course of this reading, the course of this bill, and what it meant to them. Because I think it is clear from all stages of the bill what an important cultural and symbolic and emotional heart of Christchurch the Arts Centre has become since it was, well, while it was the university, but since it was transferred from the university to the city in 1973. And I think a reading and a consulting of this Hansard will be a very important record of just how important that this set of building has been. I think it is incredibly important that we do have the proper provisions to ensure that we can preserve these buildings, because, Mr Speaker, heritage and our heritage fabric of our city have been one of the victims of the Christchurch earthquakes, that we have lost far too much of our built heritage, and I think it is something that we in Christchurch all feel strongly. As of February 2015, there's been 1,240 demolitions within the 4 avenues. That's compared to 292 building consents, by the by. But 20% of that 1,240 buildings have been heritage buildings that have been demolished. And I think this is a great sadness that all contemporaries look on, the loss of this built history of their city. It's the aftermath of the quakes, of course, that SERA, through Section 38 of the SERA legislation, gave the power to demolish damaged buildings, heritage buildings, without consultation. And, Mr Speaker, I think it's an important time to put on record, while we are talking about a way in which we're going to preserve an incredibly important set of heritage buildings in Christchurch, that we on this side of the House believe that the time for that has passed, that we do need to return to a proper discussion about our heritage in our city. At previous readings of this speech, Mr Speaker, I've spoken about the part one of my predecessors, the Right Honourable Norman Kirk, the member for Sydenham, a very fine seat, played in the preservation. Yes, the Honourable Ruth Dyson is also claiming the Right Honourable Norman Clerk, quite rightly so. And the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove can claim him as a mayor of Kaiapoi as well, Mr Speaker. But, Mr Speaker, it was the Right Honourable Norman Kirk that had a dream about the Arts Centre buildings becoming the cultural and educational centre for Christchurch. And it was he in 1973 at the university's centennial convocation that made the announcement that these buildings were to be gifted to the city. And when Norman Kirk made this announcement about the buildings being gifted to the city, he made the point that it was about drawing together the various strands of culture in New Zealand to produce something that was uniquely New Zealand. And I think these are the words that we need to hold dear to, because Norman Kirk did have a very firm grasp of the importance of culture and our history in the place of the making of a modern identity in 1970s New Zealand. In 1973, that same year, that he said that politics is the conscious projection of a country's identity and not something removed or remote from everyday life. And I think they're important words to leave the final passage of this, for me to leave this final passage of this bill on, because I think the passing of this legislation and the preservation of these buildings are not something removed or remote from the everyday life of Cantabrians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.